ESG and sustainability is difficult, even for those of us who spend all day thinking about this. But what advice would you give professionals that are trying to communicate this to different stakeholder groups, whether it's internally for employees, externally towards investors and consumers, whatnot? What would be kind of your top level advice for companies that are trying to translate these complicated topics to these stakeholder groups?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Mike. I mean, getting, as we said in the beginning of the podcast, getting the communications right unlocks the power of the idea. And yet somehow we have invented so much jargon, so much abbreviations and acronyms. And by the way, they're different. That we just confuse everybody, right? So we were throwing them around, the CSRD and all of that stuff earlier. And you're like, what does that really mean? And everybody's always afraid to ask, it's like, oh, if I ask the question, I'll sound stupid or something. But it's so important, to stay away from jargon, to take a step back and say, why are we doing this? As the discussion went earlier, I was mentioning how all of these regulations we're talking about now are really disclosure regulations. So step back, really look at the theory of change. By putting information out there, something will get better. Is that tested? Do we know that's going to happen? Just having the ability to step back and look at the big picture and describe why we're doing something gives people the context rather than just diving in and then throwing around a bunch of jargon. So that is something I try to do with my writing and my speaking and podcasting, because I think it just helps. Not only helps people understand, but then it helps bring them in to the cause. I used to work in the private sector, as I mentioned, and I got into some executive roles, and I studied leadership. And one of the things about leadership is clear communications. And the story that I'll tell is Colin Powell. Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State. He was in battle and wars and stuff, and he said, "What is the definition of a leader? A leader is someone that others will follow. How do you get people to follow when potentially their lives are on the line? You have to inspire them. And to inspire them, you have to speak clearly. What's the objective? Why should you be involved?" And I think while that's a very extreme example, it may not be as extreme as we think. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about the health of the planet. We're talking about our future, our children, our grandchildren. And when you put it in terms like that, then the jargon kind of fades away. And we remember why we are here, why we are doing what we are doing. And that's the power of clear communication and storytelling. It brings others into the cause so they can help us lead to a better future.
I think that's great. I'm currently reading Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us. I don't know if you've checked that out yet, but she talks a lot about how we can make stories out of these complex topics. And also by kind of appealing to these more kind of humanistic angles, we can overcome the jargon, which the jargon often becomes politically charged, and we can avoid that and actually connect with people where they are, which is kind of speaking to why I even made this my career focus and this the focus of this podcast. So thank you for those insights, Tim.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is so very important. And I really am so glad to be here and maybe help a little bit in terms of the journey that you're on.